Hello YouTube. This is definitely the better camera. I think last time I had it about twice as far away. I think it's because I didn't want the top of my head to get cut off if I move upwards at all, but I'm a sloucher, so it doesn't really matter, I guess. Also, the top of my head isn't all that important, and it's covered with a hat, so little A, little B. Today, wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to talk about today. I kind of had a video idea when I was driving into work this morning, but I'm not sure. And we're going to do it anyway. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about the year I was a diabetic. And from that, we can always go into my other medical history, which is just as thrillingly awful. So, about 2 years ago now, almost 2 years, I was in the hospital with no platelets. It's a condition called immune thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP. And we can talk about that in another video, but one of the treatments for that, once you leave the hospital, is they give you oral steroids. Most of you would have heard of prednisone. There's also another called dexamethasone, some of you may have taken. All of these are drugs called glucocorticoids. The important part about that is the gluco part, which basically means that it gets processed kind of as sugar in your body. And this can make your blood sugar go up really high. And that's pretty common. This is called steroid-induced diabetes. Generally, when people go off steroids, their blood sugar returns to normal. Mine didn't do that. Mine was up very, very high. In fact, when I eventually went to the doctor for that problem, my A1C was 12.1, which is astonishingly high. So I then saw an endocrinologist, and they diagnosed me as being a type 1 diabetic. So for those of you who don't know the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, type 2 diabetes is generally where your body makes insulin, but it doesn't make enough insulin. This is also called insulin resistance, where you can't use the insulin properly. This tends to be, or at least a good chunk of people with type 2 develop it due to poor eating habits. That's why it's becoming a bigger problem in countries like the US, because we have terrible eating habits, and far too many people are overweight or obese, which is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. That's not to say all people with type 2 have that problem. There are cases of very healthy people developing type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, on the other hand, also called juvenile diabetes, though they're starting to get away from that, is where your body attacks the cells that make insulin until you can't make any anymore. And so that's what they thought I had. And so for about a year, I was taking insulin and checking my blood sugar and doing all that terrible stuff. And I will tell you, taking insulin is much better today than it was, but when you had to use like really big syringes. Now they have the nice little pen that you just... Except, you need to inject it into fat, and I have no fat at all. My eventual solution was to kind of hunch over a little bit and basically kind of push together as much fat as I could in my stomach, which still is not very much, but it worked. Eventually, though, I was finding that my blood sugar was low all the time, which is good but bad. And eventually, one of my endocrinologists basically said, "You don't really seem like you're diabetic anymore." And eventually they decided that it was because of the steroids. Apparently, I react very badly to steroids. And what happens is if your blood sugar is really high for a really long time, your pancreas is basically like, "I'm done. I'm out. Not making anything else because you're not using it." And so my pancreas had stopped making insulin, even though it was perfectly healthy. And once I was taking insulin, my pancreas turned back on, but because I was on insulin, they didn't know that, and there isn't a test for that, really. They did eventually run a test that kind of lets you know, and that was when they decided you don't need to take insulin anymore, you're not diabetic. So yeah, that was kind of the year of me being a diabetic. Finger sticking, taking insulin. I actually got a sensor for a while that I could like scan to get my blood sugar, which I think is super cool. I think there's a lot of great stuff for diabetics. It's all extraordinarily expensive and insurance doesn't pay for it, which is a travesty. But I really just wanted to talk about that because I think it's kind of an interesting story. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a super boring story. I don't know. But I think the kind of the big moral of the story is to always be a little skeptical of what you're being told. When your doctor knows a lot, but they're human just like you and me. and they don't always have the right answer. So I think some healthy skepticism is useful to have. I'm not saying question your doctor about everything, but when they diagnose you with something like diabetes, and then you start to look and see that you don't seem to have all the things that normally fit that disease, maybe ask some questions about it, because I think a little bit of skepticism is healthy. And I think if we were all more skeptical about what we were being told, both in general and in terms of medicine, I think we'd all be in a better place.